so people can just come when as they please and leave. I've turned the waiting room off. So hi everyone, I'm Jason. I'm one of the trainee CBT therapists at Talk Together Bromley, and I'll let Ella introduce herself.
Hello, so I'm a trainee CBT therapist at Herefordshire Healthy Minds.
And we thought we'd just spend an hour today just kind of talking through a couple of things regarding the CBT training. Now, for those who don't know, we did a webinar like this before. It is up on YouTube. If you just type HICBT Webinar on YouTube, you'll see a video. It is a lot longer than the one today, about 2 hours and 40 minutes long. And that's because for the most part, we spoke about the Ksa. Now, for that reason, we're not going to go into too much depth with the Ksa today, just because, you know, I'd say just look at that last video. We went into so much depth, didn't we, Ella?
Yeah.
Like, we spent an hour and 40 minutes on it, and we went through each section. So do, I'm really glad, Zoe. Thank you. So yeah, do look at that one if you're more interested in the Ksa. What I thought we could do more so today is talk a little bit about, you know, where we're training, our background experiences before we got into the training, talk a little bit about our thoughts of the training, the challenges, the positives, a little bit about our day in the life. Ella, are you able to put the link of the webinar in the chat?
Yep, I'll have to find it first.
Oh, just go into YouTube, HICBT Webinar, you'll find it there. So talk a little bit about the day in the life of a trainee CBT therapist. Talk a little bit about the comparisons to previous jobs. So there might be some people here who were PWPs. So I'll be talking a little bit about that. Ella will be talking about it from her point of view as an assistant psychologist. Talk a little bit about different routes onto the course. And then kind of the most part of today, we're talking a little bit about the application process and interview process, and talking briefly about writing a good application, some of the common mistakes I've seen when reading other people's applications, the interview process, things to consider regarding the interview, and then just leave maybe about 10 minutes at the end for any questions. So if you do have questions, could I ask that you do leave it to the end, only because last time we kept having to stop to answer questions, and that's part of why we ended up going for 2 hours and 40 minutes. So if you do have questions, just make a note. We will answer as many as we can towards the end as well. Ella, is there anything else?
No, that sounds good to me.
Okay, so I'll just start talking a little bit about myself regarding the training. So I'm currently training with King's College, London, at a service called Talk Together Bromley. My background experiences prior to getting on was a psychological wellbeing practitioner and then a senior PWP. Yeah, Ella?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to find that link, Jason.
Oh,
and
I'll do it while you talk.
So my background, sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, just a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I was so committed to finding that link, I wasn't listening to anything, sorry. So I'm Ella. My background prior to getting onto the training is I was an assistant psychologist, and previous to that I was a programs facilitator in forensic settings. The role was kind of very similar to an assistant psychologist, it's just a different name really. And yeah, in my kind of role with AP, it was quite diverse and it was in the private sector, so I had no previous NHS experience either. I guess just to add to that, my experience is when me and Jason were applying, we're good friends and we have been for many years, I found that not having PWP experience could be a barrier to some application centres across the UK. So I think as you know, many people here I'm sure are aware of the doctorate and the application processes to that, I think you have to really be committed to do your research to find out kind of what centres are kind of looking for your experience and would value an application from an assistant psychologist. I don't say that to kind of demean anybody who's from a PWP background, because I'm a living experience that it can be done, but it's about, as I said, do your research. Me and Jason applied to 10 plus?
Yeah, I think so.
I got an interview at one and was successful at one. in comparison to Jason, who's been a PWP who got multiple interviews and obviously there's individual differences in assessment and experience, but and multiple successes as well. So you know, I just personally feel that was a barrier.
I applied to about 12 different unis and I was shortlisted for 11 of them, and I ended up going to just looking at Lauriane's face and I was I interviewed at 6 because there's no way I could have attended 11 interviews. I was offered 4 out of 6 places from that. So I would have to echo what Ella said in that, being a PWP, I don't know if there are any PWPs currently here. If you are, feel free to say hello in the chat. But it definitely seemed a lot easier for me in comparison to Ella, just based on that as well.
Yeah, and obviously we don't know where people are in their psychological careers. So I guess if you are in a position where, you know, PWP training is on your radar as well as the HICBT, you know, although I haven't done it myself, I've worked with many people who do, and I know Jason has, and, you know, I'm a massive advocate for that as well in terms of experience. And had I have done it, I feel like I would have been better prepared to engage in an IAP service, which is very different to the private sector.
Definitely. And just on that, I am doing a webinar on the PWP applications next week. That is Wednesday at, I want to say 7:30. Look on the, if anyone's on the, I'll probably send a link later on in chat if anyone is interested in that. Okay, so talked a little bit about that. So now just talk a little bit about our thoughts of training. So this is something me and Ella do quite a lot, is talk about the training, because we're both at different universities. Ella's at Birmingham, I'm at KCL, so they both do things slightly differently. And it's a really tough and fast-paced course no matter where you go. Right, I've just spent 6 hours non-stop writing a 4,000 word case report, for example, and because it's postgraduate and because you're working as well, it does feel you do feel quite pressured to meet the deadlines as well. What do you think, Ella?
Yeah, I would say it's not unmanageable, but there are definitely like this week I'm feeling quite positive, so that will come across in the way how I explain that to you. Yeah. Had this webinar been last week, I might have been, you know, even like, you know, more tired, run down, and I might have given you a different account. It's very kind of peaks and troughs around when your submissions are, and what I would say is, regardless of submissions as well, you only receive so much teaching at university. So in order to be prepared for clients, there is a lot of kind of extracurricular stuff you need to do and reading. So that for me is the difficult part in the pace, is the knowledge you need to acquire outside of the teaching.
Absolutely. You go to university twice a week and you have a whole day of lecture, but I think I always remember what my clinical lead told me, which is once you qualify from the training, that's when you tell yourself, now I'm ready to do the training. And it very much feels like that, in that you kind of feel like, and I'm not saying this to put anyone off, it's manageable, it's great, but you can feel like you're quite overwhelmed because you're seeing real life people with their problems, and at the same time you're trying to learn what it is you need to do in therapy as well. But I would say, like Ella said, if you manage your time well, you kind of keep to things, it's more than manageable. But at the same time, it is a postgraduate course, and because of that, of course, it's going to be quite difficult as well. Some of the positives for me about the training so far has just really been the teaching itself. What I really like, especially if there's any PWPs currently here, they would know what I really like about the training is this emphasis of really being client focused and kind of working to what the client's needs are, responding to those clients' needs. And there's less this idea of you need to do a number of things each session. More so the emphasis is on what's the one good thing you can do each session. So, and on top of that, you have about 60 to 90 minutes a session. Plus you can see them for a lot longer. Now, anyone who works in secondary care, that probably doesn't seem all that impressive, but for any PWPs, you know, they're limited to 30-minute sessions for about 6 sessions in total. Hi, Astrid, I got PWP. And so you're essentially have double the length you would, and there's less of a strict criteria you need to follow session by session. It is more based on what the client's needs are as well. That's something I've really enjoyed so far. What about you, Ella?
I think for me, it was finding a psychological career that I feel content and liberated in. It feels like such a privileged position to be in. And it's really interesting as well, because you're dealing with a wide range of mental health issues, you know, anxiety, depression, OCD, specific phobias, which can come in all shapes and sizes. Body dysmorphic disorder, health anxiety. It just is endless. Obviously the learning with that then becomes endless, but it's really, really interesting. And like Jason, I really enjoy the university and the learning aspect. So like for me, I go to university on a Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm like, woohoo, yay, 2 days off, because I don't see that as a drain. Like I see that as really exciting. And for me, it's like those 2 days are a really positive day for me. I mean, it's been hard, and the pandemic has presented with challenges in that that's online, which I do find exhausting, but generally like the content is really, really interesting. So I'd reached a point in my career where I was like, I know I just want to be in a room with someone and I want to help, but I don't know how I can do that. And so finding this was just kind of, you know, amazing, and it is so enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think it's the prospect of opportunities being a CBT therapist presents. You know, for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm stuck in a particular area. Even though I'm trained in an IAPT, once you're a CBT therapist, you can pretty much apply to work in secondary care services or charities or private. There is that flexibility, which I know many of us working in mental health aren't quite used to, because when we've gotten jobs, they've kind of just been that, jobs. There might be some people here doing a career change, but for many people who were assistant psychs or PWPs, you're kind of limited to that environment you're working in, where it doesn't seem like that as a CBT therapist as well. Now, in terms of day in the life, so for us, of course, it depends on the day, but when we have university, mine falls on a Thursday and Friday. I start about 9:30 on Thursday, finish about 4:30, and they do offer plenty of breaks in between that. And on Fridays, and I think, Ella, you get the same, we have Uni Supervision. So you are given a supervisor who you see each week for about 90 minutes with 2 other peers, and you bring up to 3 cases to discuss, where you're showing clips of your sessions, reflecting on them, learning from them, and they're essentially supervising those cases. So I say that because that was quite surprising to me, because I was quite used to the service being the only ones who supervise the case. But on my caseload, which is about 8, so I see about 8 clients a week, 3 of those are supervised strictly by the university, and my service has no input on them. I don't know what it's like for you, Ella.
So I am 2 days a week at university as well, and it's 1.5 days worth of teaching, 9:30 till 4:30, and then half a day group supervision, where you take your clinical cases. We got advised not to take clients to both placement and university supervisors, just because, you know, supervision's a bit of a minefield. What one person recommends might not be what the next does. So I think it allows for more coherent and directive guidance. But I have taken clients to both. Like, it doesn't, you know, I don't think it's as strict as that at Birmingham. Like, you know, that, you know, we have control of those, they have control of them, if that makes sense. It's more of an advisory thing for your learning and understanding and, you know, supervision styles.
And from my understanding, that's how most universities do it. I think KCL is just a bit more strict on that. But I think regardless, it's worth keeping your cases separate anyway, just as Ella mentioned, because of that different advice you can give. And it's quite challenging anyway to work with one supervisor and work with the advice they give you. Then you have another supervisor who might disagree with that and give you something else as well. And then on the other days, so on our working days, obviously the diary depends on when you see your clients, but typically I aim to see about 3 people a day. So on Mondays, I start at 12, have my first client at 1, followed by case management with my service supervisor at 3, and then I have another client at 4:15, and then finally at 5:30. That's typically how my day is broken down. And for anyone that seems like, oh, that sounds like a dream, like that doesn't sound like much at all. Problem is you're studying and preparing a lot in between those times. I find with these sessions, you really do have to prepare beforehand, get everything in place, get an idea of what you're going to do, read up on your notes, read up on papers if there's something you haven't quite understood. So for example, I did imagery re-scripting a few weeks ago for the first time, and I had to spend an hour beforehand reading the journal articles on it just to see how that actually works as well. And so that's typically how my day is broken out. I do spend an hour on Wednesday speaking with my supervision group, and this is the group of people I mentioned that I see with on Friday. And we tend to just prepare what kind of things we're going to discuss, because 90 minutes shared between 3 people, 3 cases each, that you are quite limited on time. So we spend about an hour mostly talking about our week, stressing, crying about the things we have to do, but also preparing what the themes we want to discuss in supervision, kind of deciding what are the most important elements to bring. And that's typically what my week looks like in a nutshell.
So for me, the expectations at my university is that I carry a slightly bigger caseload than Jason. So I think on average, it does tend to be around 10. KCL have dropped to 8, haven't they, Jason?
Oh yeah, so it was 10, but they found out we were seeing 10, and the KCL was like, oh no, you're working remote, that's hard enough, bring it down to 8.
Brilliant. Yeah. So, you know, my week probably looks slightly different to Jason's in that I carry an extra 2 people on my caseload. So it might not sound like a lot, but it feels a lot. So my typical day is I work in the service on a Monday, Thursday and Friday. So on a Monday and Thursday, I'll see 4 clients, and on a Friday morning 2, and I have a study afternoon on a Friday afternoon, whereby I meet up with other trainees as well and utilise that space for support. I think that's really important to kind of discuss how your week's been, what challenges there've been, kind of more like, you know, like what you get in an office environment, especially as we're working online. I think that's really important to have that space. So just like, for example, on a Monday, like I work 9 till 5. I have an hour's supervision with my supervisor plus then my 4 clients. So that's 5 hours out of my day taken up straight away without clinical notes and any space for then kind of reading around supporting my clients. So, you know, generally I don't end up working 9 till 5. I do have a really good work-life balance because I'm, you know, like think I'm really organized. But you know, that you know, that is what it looks like. 5 hours a day, kind of just intense in supervision in sessions on a Monday. Thursday, I have a little bit more of a luxury in that I work 9 till 5 and only have 4 clients. So I space them, kind of have one like 9 till 10, one 11 till 12, one 1 till 2. So that's a little bit kinder because you've got half an hour for your notes and then half an hour to read up on your next patient. But like Jason said, if you're dealing with something complex like PTSD, you're probably the night before reading up on the protocols or, you know, theoretical background so that you have, you know, you feel confident going into that session.
Yeah, and it's also just the logistics of certain things you do in sessions that you need to prepare for. So for example, if you're working with social anxiety, you'll need to do something called a stooge experiment, which is essentially where a client, and if you're a PWP, you may have offered to be a stooge before. But essentially, for those who don't know, it's where you have the client with social anxiety do 2 things, where they have a conversation with a stranger they've not met. One time they're using all their safety behaviors, which I won't get into what safety behaviors are because you'll learn that if you do the training. They'll do that the first time, and then the second time they'll speak to the same person but without the safety behaviors. And the idea of it is for the client to understand, actually, safety behaviors don't work. They actually make me come across more anxious, more nervous and more awkward. And that, of course, you're relying on a third person to be able to commit. So it's the idea of having to contact someone in the service or getting someone to join for that. And that's just one idea. And then, of course, if you're doing any behavioral experiments, it's this idea of setting it up, no matter what that is, especially if it requires going outside, for example. So that again is where you may be prepping between sessions as well. So that kind of goes on for me to talk a little bit about how the high intensity training and the role does compare to my previous job as a PWP, and then for Ella that'll be in comparison to an assistant psych. Now, for any of the PWPs here, I think for the longest time we've had a vague idea, for me anyway, we had a vague idea of what step 3 does, what a CBT therapist does. And I remember one PWP telling me, oh, you know, CBT therapists, they have just more tools than us. And I think on reflection, that couldn't be more wrong, because with CBT therapists, I think the gap is wider than a PWP than I could have ever expected. Just everything you do, much of the role of a PWP is almost being that of a life coach. Not to diminish the role, it is a really great role, great training, but essentially you're telling the clients what it is, what the evidence is. So if you're working with depression, the evidence, you're going through a manual, telling them the evidence is that doing more, having a balance of activities is the fastest way to improve symptoms of depression. If you're working with they say panic, but I swear it's more agoraphobia because it's exposure therapy. But if you're working with panic, then you'll be doing graded exposure, and again you're kind of telling them the evidence, giving them the homework where they face that themselves. Now with step 3, you're doing much of that stuff in session. So for example, if you're working with exposure, you're actually going to be doing the exposure work together, and it's less about telling the client what the evidence is, so saying, oh, this is what we need to do. It's about more helping them discover that themselves. So for example, you would never tell a client really that panic attacks don't kill you and that they're not dangerous, whereas that's one of the first things you would say as a PWP. You're more actually getting them to understand that actually panic attacks are harmless. It's what they would call guided discovery, and that's much about the difference in the role, is this idea that you're not really telling the clients what the information is, you're helping them discover that themselves. And you're doing that through a lot of Socratic dialogue.
Sounds so simple when you say it like that, Jason, but the difference is unbelievable.
Yeah, no, incredibly. And also, like I mentioned, this idea of doing one good thing. As a PWP, you pretty much had a set of things you had to cover session by session. So for example, I remember when I was doing behavioral activation with depression, you know, you would introduce the idea of it. You might get them to rate some activities that are easy, medium, and hard. You might get them to do like an activity schedule, more than one thing. In step 3, those things are broken down into their own individual sessions. So week 1, you're just introducing the idea of monitoring your activities. Week 2, you're reviewing that, and then you're discussing this idea of making slight changes. And it's all kind of a bit more of a long-term process as opposed to doing it quickly in one session. Though that for me seems to be the biggest differences between step 2 and step 3. And I'll pass it on to Ella, who will have a different experience.
So yeah, different but similar, if that makes sense. So a lot of my experiences as an AP is I would deliver kind of manualized CBT treatment. So it was quite didactic, again, like what Jason's describing there. It's more like descriptive, some little bits of guided discovery. So, you know, I've been delivering CBT or, you know, programs, help, advice, guidance on the principles of CBT, probably, you know, for 5 or 6 years prior to commencing the training. And I thought, yeah, I've got a pretty good understanding of CBT. This is great. I'm just going to go and get a certificate to say I'm good at it. Jesus Christ, I did not realize what I did not know about CBT. And I cannot just tell you how much it blows my mind that how much I did not know about CBT. It's just a completely different, you know, just the depth it goes into and what you can achieve with it is, you know, amazing. Like I've always thought, you know, oh, I can't wait to do EMDR because, you know, that's a goal of mine. But then I'm learning about kind of cognitive restructuring and trauma reliving, and I'm like, wow, what the change you can make with CBT is, you know, just I just didn't even know that. Not that I didn't know it was possible because the research is there, but like I just, yeah, it's just incomparable, really. the teaching and how much depth it goes into and how much there is to learn. You know, I do feel so equipped with like the models, and you know, it really just goes from A to Z of an in-depth kind of what you need to know, but it only really gives you the basics. You know, it doesn't tell you. I think the hardest thing is you've got the theories, you've got the models, and you've got kind of what it would look like in practice, but nobody tells you how to be Socratic or how to support guided discovery, or another important skill, which is conceptual integration. You know, you can't be told how to do those things. That comes with you as a therapist in kind of your therapeutic style. And I think developing those skills are the things that take the hardest, because when you've come from quite a didactic background, it's quite easy to start telling as opposed to getting people to explore. But you know, CBT actually isn't about telling at all, and without that guidance you're not going to be passing like some of the main requirements of the programs.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a story the course lead of KCL once told us, this idea that CBT has this reputation of being a didactic therapy, and she told us this time she went to a conference amongst other therapists, and they were playing a bit of a game where they had to kind of pick from a list of labels or things that really sum up what that therapy is about. And all of them, every single one, the counsellors, the systemic therapists, EMDR, CBT therapists, including her, all went for Socratic dialogue. And I think what the point of that story was really to emphasize how important that really is and what a powerful tool being Socratic is, especially in CBT and all therapy. And as a PWP for myself, you get used to being didactic because you only have 30 minutes a session, you need to get this information out quite quickly. Whereas at step 3 with CBT, you just have a bit more time to really explore those things. So for example, I'm working with a client with health anxiety, and you know, for the longest time, this client had this idea that constantly checking their skin for cancer was helpful, and it was what they needed to do. And typically, the first thing you might do is say, no, that isn't helpful. Why would that be helpful? All you're doing is bringing your attention back to it. But that's not the goal. The goal is to actually say, okay, well, let's test this idea then. Why don't we do a bit of an on-off experiment? One day, you're not going to check at all. The next day, you can check as much as you want. And you tell me which one helps you the most. And that's where the guided discovery really comes in, the Socratic dialogue really comes in. So that kind of, for me, sums up how different it is. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Ella?
No, that's all good.
Okay, so already it's been half an hour, so we'll kind of fly through, because of course the bit we want to talk about the most is the application process and interview process, and then obviously time for questions. But talking a little bit about the routes onto the course. Now, obviously there's a few people here and I don't know everyone's background. I don't know if anyone feels comfortable writing in the chat quickly what their backgrounds are currently, so we don't have to talk about the bits that aren't relevant. I know we've got so we've got an AP, brilliant. I know someone mentioned they're a PWP. AP. Oh, great, we've got another PWP. Counselling. Oh, best of luck with that. Okay, so, and we got senior PWP. So we got a probation officer, Ella.
I failed to mention I worked in probation prior to, in between my AP role and this role. It's actually seen as very valuable experience.
So it froze on me then. I heard you say you used to be a probation officer, and I didn't hear the rest of it. My internet's really bad.
Yeah, I was a trainee probation officer for, I think it was, how long was it for? Maybe 6 to 9 months prior to taking on this role. It's, you know, it's really seen as valuable when applying in this field. Previously, it was a competency once qualified that you could come on without having to do the KSE,
Yeah.
KSA, but it got removed last October. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good to know that they value it though. Yeah, thank you.
And so from that then, it looks like everyone would need to do a KSA. So the route will very much look the same for everyone, in that it's worth starting your KSAs, especially if you're thinking of applying this year for the high intensity training. So I would really, again, I'll put the link in the chat, but at some point, watch the video. If you haven't started your KSA, look about an hour in and we will go through that. So I don't know, I know one person said they're a counsellor, and I guess that so I don't know if the counsellor count, if this, you know, some of them do have a core profession, some don't. Yeah, that's fine. Feel free to turn your cameras off. So in terms of counsellors, I can confirm that we do have quite a few counsellors on my course, and I've met a few others. So
likewise.
You know, one of the things about being a counsellor is that, of course, you've got a lot of experience working one-to-one with people, but also a lot of counsellors have experience using CBT to some degree. So absolutely, that'll be fine. I would say if you're still at a stage where you're not sure, can I apply? Then my advice would be look at the KSA guidelines. If you just type KSA CBT in Google, and what I'll do is I'll put it in the chat, the link, and go through the KSA criteria. There's about, 13 criteria. And if you feel like you can meet all of those comfortably, then I'd say absolutely go for it as well. Now, for PWP, if you've been qualified 2 years now, then absolutely, if you feel you're ready, my experience was quite positive, as we kind of established at the beginning as well. I think if you're not limited to your area you're living in, it is worth just applying everywhere, just alone for that, maybe that experience as well. And we've got a trainee CWP as well. And I'd imagine the CWP is very much like the PWP role. Is pretty much the same competencies, except different groups of clients you're working with. So again, when you've kind of hit that qualified threshold, I imagine you'd have about the same chance as a PWP as well. And there are also high intensity trainees specific for young people that is coming out as well. I think we saw about one of those, didn't we? A vacancy for that. So that's becoming more and more popular as well, if that's still the background you want to work with. So that, I guess everyone's routes seem similar in that it's about the KSA. So really, I'd say watch the video we linked in the chat if you're unsure about the KSA as well. Now, I guess really the meat and bones of today is about the application and interview process. So Ella, can I let you start with the application process? Just talk a little bit about, well, what your experience is, what made a good application.
Yeah, so again, it's about, you know, doing your research because every application centre across the country has a different application process. So for example, Ksa, where Jason goes, you apply directly through the university. Okay, the Midlands, from what I can establish, does things slightly differently in that you have to apply to the University of Birmingham and your placement individually. So not only are you applying via NHS jobs for a job role, you're also applying to the university. So I found that quite challenging because you're getting assessed twofold. You know, you have to be successful in both aspects. So yeah, different parts of the country would do that differently. Some you apply once and you get interviewed once, and that's kind of a package, or you have to kind of do the two things separately. So that's the first thing you need to establish, is where you're going to apply and what are their application procedures, you know. Lots of jobs tend to pop up from about this time every year on NHS jobs. So you just put in the kind of high CBT trainee and they're all kind of readily available for you to apply. Like I said earlier, in terms of research, I think it's really important to be proactive in looking at course centres and ringing course leaders and lecturers to speak about your experience and what they think about your application. So I was a trainee probation officer, not enjoying the role. Essentially, I'd made the jump because I wasn't progressing in my psychological career, really hated probation. So what you love, honestly, stay with it. Don't go somewhere else for the money because it isn't worth it. So that was just my personal experience. And I just phoned Richard Bennett from Birmingham University. I said, look, this is my experience. Would you value an application from me? And he said, if you're passionate, you've got relevant experience and you enjoy this, go for it. And I said, oh, but I'm going to be qualified in like a few months and I can get on without a KSA. And he said to me, that's great, but why would you stay in a job you're unhappy with for a further 6 months just to avoid the KSA? He said, because if I was you, I'd just jump on it, because what you're telling me, I'm liking the hit, like, you know, I'm liking what I'm hearing. So put in an application and let's see what happens. And, you know, I think that's so important to build those connections. And, you know, you hear so many horror stories or people gossip, and, you know, I always think go straight to the horse's mouth, you know, speak to the courses, get in touch with the administrators, get your information. I know there's a lot more information readily available on the doctorate, but, you know, start building your research base. Yeah, so for me, I applied separately to both, although that was quite daunting. You know, they have good links with one another. And what I found is if you apply to the university first, and actually if you've managed to get a place on the university, I think job, like when you apply to the jobs, they're quite understanding, and that this person must have the skill. So when they're interviewing, they're kind of thinking, wow, you've been accepted at university, you're quite competent. If you are unable to secure a job in the Midlands, the university are supportive of helping you find one. That was my experience in Birmingham.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
And I know with Birmingham, they did a thing where they offered to do a joint interview with the university and the service. And that's what I did. So I was offered both the service and the university. That came up as an option. It's very different with KCL. With KCL, you apply through their website, and they've got like a bit of an application guide on their website, but they essentially talk you through it all. And essentially, you are picking from a list of services what your first two choices are. So for me, I said my first choice is Bromley, my second choice is Greenwich. You unfortunately only get interviewed for one. So if your first choice shortlists you, the second one won't see your application, unfortunately. And it's very much the same with the UCL and PWP. So if you've trained at UCL as a PWP, the process is nearly identical as well. And for the interview, it was very much two people from the service and one from the university, was it? In terms of the other places I applied, so with Sussex Uni, it was through NHS jobs, but again, it was a joint interview with the service and university. With Hertfordshire, I applied through the job, and a representative from the service and a representative from the uni and two people from the service joined. So it is very different. So I would start by looking at NHS jobs. That's where a lot of the vacancies come from, particularly with Surrey, Sussex, Hertfordshire, and I believe places like Newcastle as well, because I interviewed there. Birmingham is through their website for the university aspect. KCL is through their website.
Same with Coventry and Warwick and Stafford as well, which I would say if you're APs, they're the places to apply if you're not logistically tied. I found that the Midlands are just much more open to AP experiences. And they all link in with Birmingham University, which again is open to AP experiences and very supportive. Like on my cohort, there's lots of APs.
Yeah. Now with KCL, there's about 60 of us on the course. However, I'd say 90% were PWPs. And that's new. It wasn't always like that. I think the reason I suspect it's like that this year is with lockdown. I think a lot of services fell, and it's not great, but I think a lot of services wanted PWPs just because PWPs are familiar with IAPT and with the whole idea of remote working. My theory is that they wanted to just have an easier time, but that is completely unsubstantiated. So take that with don't take that to heart as well. But with KCL as well, you apply through their website. However, depending on the services you pick, you may actually end up training with Royal Holloway. So that is just important to bear in mind. I think they're both great universities. I don't know Royal Holloway, I didn't apply there, but just bearing that in mind, it depends on which service you apply to, which results in which uni you go to.
I guess it's important to highlight as well that there's 2 intakes per year. One is September and one is January. So these job roles will probably be coming out about now and May and maybe like October time.
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coventry and Warwick and Stafford are kind of September, October, application ready for January start.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then I guess in terms of doing your application, so this is a really important part of it. And I've looked at a few people's applications over the years for PWP roles, started looking at some high intensity, and generally there are some amazing applications. I'm always impressed with the experiences people present. Now, with a lot of the places, I can't remember what Birmingham is like, but I know with the NHS jobs, you can use the NHS jobs application portal, so you aren't as limited to a strict word count. So my application personal statement was 3.5 pages long. I had that luxury. With KCL, however, you are limited to about 500 words, I believe. So you really got to pop. And what people do if you are limited to a word count, what people do a lot of is they use that word count to explain what their role is. Now, you have already done that in your job description and your employment history. The advice I was given from my clinical lead was, you're a senior PWP and you're a PWP. They already know what those roles do. I would spend most of your application talking a bit about the specialisms you do, the things that help you stand out. And so that's what I ended up doing. So rather than talking about the role of a PWP, I focused mostly on my specialisms, and I'm just going to get up my application, which was talking about being a guest lecturer at UCL, the service user involvement, substance misuse. And rather than talking about what you do in your job, I would really focus more on what you've learned from that job and how it makes you ready for the training, using it more as a reflective space rather than just describing what you do, because they already know that from the job description. So that's my first piece of advice. Ella?
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. My application was kind of a lot more reflective around, what of my experiences allowed me to do, gain, how have I grown, what have I learned along the way, and how do I want to build upon that on the training. So, why do I want to train, why that's important to my practice based on what I've learned and where I want to go.
Yeah, exactly. Now, with NHS jobs, you're not restricted in that way, so you can go ahead, you can talk a little bit about what you do. So for example, with PWP experience, I kind of started off with, I have a good understanding of the symptoms and the maintenance factors of a person presenting with disorders that I do not currently treat, such as health anxiety, PTSD, social anxiety. My training as a PWP allows me to recognize blah blah blah, this is what I do. But at the same time, I'm still adding the reflection. So, rather than saying, and you heard from the beginning, rather than saying I assess people with these disorders, I've kind of said, well, actually, because of my job and and because I assess people, I can recognize the signs that people have these disorders. And that's what helps me. So also talking a little bit about, so I'm just going to skim an application. So again, talking about meeting targets or managing caseload, I don't just say that I manage my own caseload. I talk about, what I've learned from managing my caseload. And so that's what I really think people should focus on the most in their application and their personal statements, is writing not only what you do, but what that's given you. How does that help you stand out, and how does that help you feel ready to do the high intensity training? Because that's what's going to help you stand out the most.
I would say print off the person specification and try and hit every point on that, but not through description, through, I guess, more reflection.
Yeah, so it's okay to say, one of the things is managing a caseload. It's okay to say, through this job, I've managed a caseload of so-and-so, but also tell me, what have you learned from that? Why are you good at that? Like, go beyond.
What are the challenges? Why does that
Yeah.
make you ready for a CBT practitioner post?
Yeah, exactly. Those for me, I think, and I think spot on with downloading the person specs. Absolutely, with most jobs, apart from KCL is a bit different, but with the NHS jobs, Birmingham, so on, download the person specs and try and write in order of the person specs as well. do that because the person reading the application will have a much easier time reading your application if it goes in order. So they can say, oh yeah, they tick this thing, they tick this box, and so on. So if people have questions about the applications, we'll answer those at the end, but that's all I can think of for now regarding the application, unless you can think of anything other.
No, I think, that's a broad overview. And again, some other questions might have popped up in the other recording. But yeah, I think, unless there's any specific questions, which we'll take at the end. Yeah.
Great. So I think then the last bit, because again, I am wary of time, which is just the interview process itself. So you've been shortlisted, fantastic. Now you've got the interview. Ella, I'll let you start because you've done Birmingham and I can't remember Birmingham now. They've all mixed into one.
Yeah, so I can only speak from the experience of Birmingham. As I said, I only applied to one centre and was successful at one centre. So initially it was a written application, and then it was a written examination based on like research. It was based on, I think you had to read a piece of research and analyse it.
Oh yeah, I did that during a meeting.
Yeah, and then shortlist from that then led to interview, which was a panel of 2 for me, and that was just for the university, unless you selected that you wanted to interview for both the university and a service. So Birmingham Healthy Minds do commission so many places every year to people studying at Birmingham University, so that's pretty handy. And then I guess the actual interviews themselves, I think I do find that there is kind of some generic things that come up, that there are kind of patterns, and you can guarantee they're going to come up in every interview, which is a reflection on kind of why you're ready for the training and why you want to be a CBT therapist. What is it about CBT? Maybe outlining a case where you've utilised CBT and how it's helped that person move forward. Potentially a risk question and disclosure around kind of suicidal ideation or self-harm and how you would manage that, and always something really around self-care and time management and how you would manage a busy diary. I think they're ones that kind of come up consistently. They're the ones I can remember off the top of my head. What about you, Jason?
Yeah, a lot of those ones for me came up a few times. A lot of questions that came up, so more so what challenges might you expect from doing the training?
Yeah.
Definitely, what attracted you to the role, why CBT? With these things, I would say don't look so much for this perfect answer. Really use it as an opportunity to show yourself, because like, for example, you wanted to be a CBT therapist, that's unique to you. And don't be afraid to kind of describe a journey of how you got there. So I started off with the idea of, actually, I didn't want to be a CBT therapist to begin with. That's something that happened over time. I initially wanted to do the doctorate. I did this role. I learned about IAPT. I did the PWP training. Over time, I grew to really like the idea of CBT and therapy and IAPT. I was just being really honest. And I think, we don't all wake up one day and say, oh yeah, I want to be a CBT therapist. It's kind of a slow progress that happens over time. So really reflect on that with yourself. Why do you want to do the training? Why do you want to be a CBT therapist? Perhaps why this course as well? That would have been harder for me because I applied everywhere.
I guess just as a disclaimer, obviously we have been through the interview processes and prepped. We're happy to speak on these videos broadly about that, but any kind of questions around kind of what were you directly asked, we're not in a position to be sharing that. I think it feels like it gives the people an unfair advantage. So just to kind of, just raise that before people start firing questions at us, what were you directly asked? One, I can't remember because I was so anxious, but I can give you an indication of those themes.
Yeah, I think the other themes to really bear in mind is your use of supervision, just supervision in general.
Yes.
Definitely cases you've worked with. It's a therapy training. They're going to want to hear about cases.
I think I got asked about supervision as well, Jason, when it's been utilised to support the progression of a case or to enable my understanding, and another time when I've disagreed with a supervisor. Yeah.
So things like that have come. Also, kind of, they want to know a bit about you. So like, what do you bring to the table as a trainee?
What do you do in your spare time?
Yeah. How are you going to manage challenges? I'm trying to think more broadly with themes. A lot of them had role plays. I don't think Birmingham did, but
No.
I think I did about I think I ended up doing about 3 role plays with 3 of the universities, and people really hate the idea of doing a role play, but I think any chance to do a role play is fantastic, because those really give you the opportunity to show off your interpersonal skills. They're not looking for you to be perfect and know all the answers. They're looking for, how are you as a therapist? How do you engage with people? How do you connect with
Which is
people?
so important, because I think the research base says that, you know, the biggest battle is that therapeutic relationship. And if you've got a great therapeutic relationship, that's the biggest indicator for change for individuals.
Exactly.
They don't
So
want textbook.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, I didn't always do the best role plays. I ran out of time before I could do something. I didn't get all this information I wanted, but I still got offered the role, and that was because, you know, that what they're really looking at is, how do you connect with the person as well. So that's some of the things to consider with the role play. In terms of kind of broadly speaking, my advice is really look through the KSA, look at the criterias, and how you meet those, because those really help you with your interview, because you're like, oh, well, I remember writing this in my KSA, so I can bring that out in an answer. Also look at the Ctsr. Now, for those who don't know, the Ctsr is the marking criteria they use on the training for your skills in therapy. And it's broken down into 9 sections, and it's things like eliciting emotion, guided discovery, you know, agenda setting. If you just type Ctsr in Google, so Ctsr, it's just all letters, it will come up, and I would go through that and get an idea of, you know, how do you meet these? No worries, Rachel, thank you for coming. So how do you meet these, and keep that in mind when you're doing the interview. Now, my other bit of advice, and this is a bit more informal, is a lot of people who are likely going to be interviewing remotely. Now, you might be extremely tempted to have all your notes on the wall that you can kind of see while they're asking questions. And if you haven't thought of that, don't think, oh, that's a great idea. It really isn't. And I'm not saying I've done this, but you want to be your most natural self in the interview. And if you're bogged down with looking for notes, reading things, you're just going to come across really robotic. So just try and be your natural self. You already know the information. It's just kind of sharing that with them.
It's much more authentic.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to be too busy scanning to find a note in that, you know, rather than focusing on what they've asked.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't be afraid to babble with it, and don't be afraid to ask them to wait a second if you need to think on it. My advice, have a drink of water with you, and once they've asked you the question, take a sip, gives you a couple of seconds to think of an answer. Don't let your mouth speak before your mind is ready.
Yeah. A piece of advice I got, I was applying for the doctorate, applied multiple years in a row. The best advice I've ever been given is, 1, to ask for the questions in written format so that you can follow them whilst they're being asked, and 2, to make notes before you answer. I've applied to lots of roles since that interview. I probably would say about 10, and I've been successful in them all. And I think that's the key, because I told the interviewers in every one of those, no matter what it was for, that I would be taking notes of having been asked a question to formulate my answer. And I probably took about 30 seconds to a minute before I get any answer. And although I was using time, which some might think is like, you know, it's really valuable, you've wasted a minute. For me, I was able to give a concise and structured answer, which I think is more important. Like you said, my mind was ready. I knew what I wanted to say.
So I think pretty much, because I'm wary of time and I'm sure people will have questions, so we'll kind of end it on it there. That was, again, because it was only an hour today, we had to speed run through this. If you want a bit more of a longer discussion, do visit the one I put in the chat last time. But what would be great now is probably to spend a bit of time just answering questions before we leave. So feel free to pop it in the chat or unmic yourself.
I'm happy to ask a question. I'm the ex-probation officer. So I actually had an interview last year. So I got through to that bit, and I was interviewed and they basically told me they really wanted to offer me the job, but they thought that I would fall down at the university interview bit, because they felt I didn't know enough about the CBT stuff. So I spent a lot of time trying to do more research and stuff, and I just wondered, it sounds like it would be 2 different interviews for me. So they saw a lot of interpersonal stuff that they liked from my interview, but I just wondered how I can help prepare for the more kind of academic CBT part of it.
Yeah, so I would say if it's about looking into IAPT, then my first advice is to look at something on Google. Just type the Reach Out Guide. If you're a PWP, you're probably aware of it. It's just Reach Out Guide. That kind of, it's more focused on the PWPs, but it does talk about the structure of IAPT quite a bit. In terms of CBT,
Jason, just jumping in there, it's really important that you develop, if you're not sure of it, your understanding of stepped care. So in that manual, does it discuss that, Jason?
It ought to. Can any PWPs confirm or disconfirm? I'm pretty sure it does. But yeah, on top of that, Zoe, what I would also recommend is looking at this idea of the stepped care model. So just like steps, it's essentially how IAPT operates. It's this idea that clients coming into the service go through a series of steps determining what kind of therapy they should have. If they're presenting with mild to moderate depression, generalized anxiety, they'll be seen at step 2, where they can either have guided self-help from a PWP, computerized CBT, or workshops. If they're presented with more complex depression, more complex anxiety, it's step 3, where they'll be seen by a CBT therapist or counsellor. And then step 4 tends to be more secondary care. Step 5 is inpatient. That's kind of how it's broken down.
Yeah, I guess because I work within children's services at the moment, so would talking about that relatable kind of tiered care, would that be helpful?
You can kind of demonstrate your own experiences working with a model like that with the tiered care. That's always helpful.
As well as obviously learning about the stepped care. Yeah,
I think having a basic understanding of it would be really helpful. In terms of CBT, if you're willing, I would really get the book Cognitive Therapy Basics and Beyond by Judith Beck.
Yeah, they recommended that book to me actually at my interview.
That probably has a lot, but I would say mostly just get into the basics of what CBT is. You're not expected to know the ins and outs of CBT. It's a training role.
Yeah.
So I'll just kind of get, what are the core principles of CBT, for example.
Okay.
I've got a more generic book as well, which is my course recommended book, and I don't particularly use it that much because I find disorder specific books more helpful. But Judith Beck's book's amazing, and it's like a Bible, but it's depression specific.
Okay.
This one is what we got offered on our course. It's Cognitive Behaviour Therapy, I've lost my chair, by Helen Kennelly, Joan Kirk and David Westbrook.
Could you just, that's it, that's perfect. Thank you.
But that gives a good basic overview as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really important, to just highlight that, have an awareness of CBT, have some experience using it in some capacity where possible, but you're not expected to know the ins and outs of it, because that's what you're doing the training role for.
I didn't find that expectation at all, because like you said, Jason, you're there because you're going to embark on a trainee post, aren't you?
Yeah. So we've got another question on, does starting from a PWP role into CBT limit the CBT roles you can apply for once you qualify? Because I've seen many person specs they require mental health registration. Okay, so this is where it does get a little confusing, actually. Provided you've been qualified as a PWP for 2 years, so that's the usual requirement, you can apply to any high intensity course. They mentioned the help mental health registration for people like social workers, like clinical psychologists. However, for people, and that's for many of us, like me, like Ella, we don't have a mental health profession. Therefore, we had to go through the Ksa route. And I put it in the chat, the guides to developing the Ksa portfolio. I'm just going to link it one more time. And if you check out the last webinar, we do talk about the Ksa in a bit more depth. So that's what you would have to do as a PWP, is do a Ksa portfolio. Do I need my Ksa portfolio ready at the point of an actual interview? So that is very dependent on the service and the university. Surrey wanted every Ksa done before the interview. Birmingham, I don't think wanted any.
No, they weren't. Your Ksa wasn't due to be submitted until October.
Yeah.
So I was quite passive, and I didn't do my Ksa until I knew I'd got an interview, just because it is a substantial amount of work. And I didn't really want to, it's awful to say I didn't want to commit to that, but I think knowing that Birmingham, that requirement was unexpected of me, I thought I would wait until I found out I've had an interview, because that seemed to be the best use of my time at that time. Yeah. But what I will say is I did look at it before the interview and make notes on every area. I wasn't, completely passive, just because I found it significantly advantaged me in the interview to have an awareness of that. And it was basically, the Ksa is not to be seen as a challenge. It's a massive piece of work which is a big reflection on what you've learned throughout your career, and I found it quite therapeutic reflecting on it. It's like your journey, it's something to really be proud of. So I felt that like writing that and reflecting on it really kind of gave me a good stead for the interview. So I would recommend doing it before, even if that requirement isn't there.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Do you think 2 months of time spent on doing Ksa would be sufficient, considering,
God, yeah. I've seen people do it in a week.
Really?
I did mine over 2 weeks annual leave.
So
annual leave, like full on.
Every day.
I see.
It's not hard, it's just really time consuming and it's overwhelming. But do watch the video of the last webinar. We go into so much depth with it.
Thank you.
No worries. And then we got my area requested a Ksa application stage, but I can't ask for work references until I hand in my notice, as then they'd know I was looking for a new job. Do you think they'd understand if I completed it but without the counter statement references from work? It's definitely worth asking, because I was just going to say with Surrey, they wanted all the KSAs, but I hadn't been able to get the counter signatures yet or the references because my supervisors were on leave. And I emailed them just to let them know and just said, is this going to be a problem? Because I've got it written, but I don't have the references yet. And they just said, as long as it's ready by the start of the course, it's fine, you can attend.
I don't think, I shouldn't foresee that as a problem.
Yeah, so my advice is definitely ask them, just let them be aware that I'm going to have it done before the start of the course, no problem. I'm just waiting for the references.
Yeah. Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions?
The course, I know you said it's 12 months. Is it actually 12 months, or does it go from September till June? It
is more September till end of June, the actual course, and then you're in service for the remainder of it typically. Now, my understanding is that because of the pandemic, Sussex have extended their course for the trainees, and they are extremely lucky. Unfortunately, KCL hasn't given us that luxury.
Nor Birmingham. But although it is, the teaching at university is only from September till June, you are required then to put a portfolio together for BAPCP accreditation and for your university. And so the expectation is that you would still be working on that.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't receive qualification until the September.
Yeah, and you're still a trainee and still a student of the university. It's just there's no more teaching is essentially what it is.
Just your lectures stop, but the work doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay. So you'd go up and pay scale in September as well, then I'm guessing.
Typically when the BABCP and your portfolio has been accepted. So for anyone who's done a PWP training, it's kind of like when the university send you that document to confirm that you have passed. It's kind of like that. So it depends on how quick they review your work.
Okay.
With my friend, he went to another service and they gave him the highest spine of band 6 while he was waiting to be accredited.
Okay.
No worries. Anything else? Any other questions? Yeah, I know people might have a lot of questions regarding the KSA, but honestly, we have gotten into so much depth for the last webinar, so do watch that webinar. We go through every single section, talk about what to include, what to think about, what to add. We even had a qualified CBT therapist who has a lot of experience with the Ksas and the courses, chime in a bit as well. No problem, guys. So that was kind of a bit of a speed through of the calls. I wish everyone the best of luck. Do feel free to message us if you've got individual questions on Facebook. I'm
Ella Natasha.
Yeah, I'm Jason. Why? And then we have a question for you, Ella, repeating the name of the author who wrote a book about CBT. The book you showed. It would have just say what it is.
It's Kennelly and Westbrook, but there's probably loads of books like this on the market.
I can't really see. Go in a bit more. Just put it right up to the camera.
Kennelly and David Westbrook and Helen Kennelly.
Yeah. If you guys have missed
Brilliant. Thank you.
If you guys have missed it, if you go on the same YouTube channel with the previous high intensity webinar, this will go up on there as well.
Thank you.
So if you've missed it, you can rewatch it. Hopefully everyone got the message that this is going online, because I said it a few times at the beginning. So is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, then. Thank you so much, guys. Best of luck with it all.
Thank you so
everyone.
much. It was really useful. Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.